Hello boys, today's video is about improving and getting better at Chivalry 2. I came up with this guide which is specifically directed at new players. I will be sharing and explaining in detail various types of information which I learned during my time playing the game, in hopes that you can improve at becoming a better player at Chivalry 2. We will cover topics such as the mindset, defense, offense, positioning, and weapons, so make sure you stick until the end of the video for a fully detailed guide and explanation of these topics. To begin with, we will talk about the mindset which you should have as a beginner when playing Chivalry 2. These are two short and basic rules which I have set for myself when I was starting off playing the game, and I'm sure they can help you too. Those rules consist of: rule number 1, stop being a hero. Many newbies try to fight large groups of enemies all by themselves without any backup in sight because they want to rush in and get as many kills as possible, but they barely get a single kill or takedown. This is due to getting surrounded by enemies way too quickly, and it just leads them to an almost certain death. Don't be this guy. Pick easy fights if possible, meaning if you see 1 or 2 enemies, engage with them instead. In other words, be more thoughtful of who you are picking your fights with. And rule number 2, the enemy is better than me. It's okay if you're getting wrecked. Everybody has a different playstyle, especially in 1v1 duels, so no matter how good you become, there will always be a bigger fish, meaning somebody will always have a way to counter your playstyle or the weapon which you are using. In this section, we will talk about practicing your defense first, as this nicely plays in with the previous tips. The better your defense, the longer you can stay alive. The first thing you should learn is how to conserve your stamina. With that being said, you should avoid doing things such as holding block for too long, dodging too often, and performing attacks when it isn't your turn to attack. All the 3 things mentioned drain your stamina like crazy, if performed too often and if your stamina reaches 0, and only if you manage to block an attack without a riposte or a counter, you will become disarmed and vulnerable for an attack. With that being said, there are 2 ways you can defend yourself, the riposte and the counter. The riposte is the simplest form of defense, and also the worst. It only requires you to perform an attack after blocking an attack from the enemy. The reason why it is the worst form of defense is because it gives you the shortest boost of stamina only if you land your attack from a riposte on your enemy, and if you miss, that stamina is wasted. The riposte also gives you a very short duration of active parry. The active parry gives you a small window of time where any attack and damage from the enemy is cancelled completely. Going over onto the counter, which is a more advanced way of defending yourself, the counter can be performed by blocking and performing an attack type, that of which your enemy is trying to throw at you. For example, if your enemy is throwing an overhead, you will have to hold block, and split seconds before the weapon hits you, you have to throw an overhead back at your opponent, which leads to you countering that specific attack type. Countering will give you the most stamina boost, which is important if you want to 1vx, and on top of that, it will also give you the longest amount of active parry, which again cancels enemy attacks and gives you the most survivability. I would strongly suggest that you practice countering if you want to improve on your defense. You can do that by either going into community 1v1 servers where you will find people with various playstyles. Now, in my opinion, this is the best way to learn as you train your muscle memory over and over again until you start doing the counters in fights automatically. You can also join public lobbies of 40 or 64 mixed matches with the intention of doing as many counters as possible. It might not work straight away, but in the long run, the practice will eventually pay off. Now let's talk about the offense, the do's and don'ts, and the 5 ways you can damage your enemy. There are 3 different attack types: slash, stab, and the overhead. But the biggest mistake you can make is constantly use the slash. It is the easiest attack type to counter as it is the easiest to read from the animations on the screen, regardless of which weapon you are using. So when fighting enemies, whether it is 1-on-1 or 1vx, try to mix your attacks in a more unpredictable way. For example, lead your first attack to be a stab, then follow up with an overhead, and then maybe throw in a slash. This will make the enemy counter your attacks less often, causing them to drain their stamina much quicker, allowing you to have an advantage in the fight. So as a general rule, don't spam attack with the same attack type, as this can make you very predictable and leave you dead in just a few seconds. Think of the combat system as a rhythm and timing game, where you and your enemies are performing a series of attacks and blocks in a rhythm-like manner. The first person to throw their opponent off the rhythm will land a hit. Keep this in mind. Now let's talk about feinting. Now, to perform a feint, you have to perform any attack type and then input into another attack. What this does is it throws your enemy off the rhythm and creates an opportunity for you to land a hit. Bear in mind that during a feint, you are vulnerable to enemy attacks. But nevertheless, when using feints, try not to change your attack type too quickly, as the enemy will just block the attack. Instead, you want to prolong the feint for as long as possible in the wind-up phase of your first attack before switching to another one. It should look something like this. Another thing you should learn is how to speed up or slow down your attacks. You can do this by simply dragging your mouse across the screen, because the faster you hit, the less opportunity you give for an enemy to block your attack. You can either speed up or slow down how the weapon hits your enemy to yet again throw them off the rhythm. Starting off with a slash attack, you can step to the side of your enemy and move your mouse past their body for the slash to land quicker. Or you can step in the other direction of their body and delay the weapon landing on them to throw them off the rhythm once again. Then there is the overhead, which requires you to look above your enemy or look down onto their feet. Looking up will provide you with a longer slash, meanwhile looking at their feet will perform an overhead much quicker. Some people also like to add the crouch mechanic into this while looking at their opponent's feet, in order for the weapon to hit them even faster. Now there is the stab, which the majority of players don't use that often, yet again it requires you to look onto your enemy's feet while dragging up on their body for a faster hit, or looking above their head and dragging the weapon down for a more delayed hit. You can also look away from your enemy and drag the stab onto them. That also works. Now that we explained how to speed up or delay your attacks, let's briefly talk about the kick and the jab. The kick can be used on opponents which are holding the block way too often. By kicking their block, it opens them up, giving you a free chance for an attack. Remember that when kicking, you have to be close to the enemy, otherwise if you will miss, you will be the one that is exposed for an attack. There is also the jab, which I personally wouldn't use very often in offensive situations, mostly defensively. The jab serves the purpose of interrupting your enemy attacks while they are still in the wind-up phase. Using the jab can be useful when you are fighting a very aggressive opponent. In that way you can break their rhythm, and for an example, you can jab your enemy overhead feints into a slash, giving you a free hit. Now let's talk about the areas in which you should improve as a new player, your game sense, and specifically positioning. This is important for your survival on the battlefield, as the longer you can stay alive, the more damage you can deal. The more damage you can deal, the more takedowns and kills you can acquire. Starting from the basics, when you are fighting in groups or 1v1s, make sure you are positioned in a way that all of your enemies are in front of you, and not off to the side or behind you. The reason why is because finding yourself surrounded will often lead to a quick death, so make sure your back is not exposed towards the enemy and that you don't overextend into enemy territory. To avoid being trapped, you can simply walk around the enemy or dodge into a direction which pulls you out of a nasty situation. However, make sure you don't dodge too often, as it can drain your stamina very quickly and you won't be able to block anything, as you will be exposed for an attack. Now this part also plays into your positioning and is a thing you should avoid doing, which is getting trapped against obstacles, buildings and surroundings, as they can ruin the flow and rhythm of your fights, so instead you should be positioning yourself in decently open spaces if possible. Now I know that some maps don't allow for such things to happen, but in maps that do, it is best to stick to this tip as a beginner. This next advice is also very simple: play the objective. If you are playing on the defensive side and there is a point you have to hold, stay on that point. Don't rush out towards the enemy, as you will quickly be left outnumbered. Help your teammates and hold the objective for as long as possible. And if you're playing on the offensive side, don't always choose the middle path. Many maps offer various ways to reach the objective, so sometimes it is a good practice to try and flank your opponents, in a way that you can pick easy kills if you strike your enemy from the back. The fights can quickly become a meat grinder, leading you or your teammates to deal large amounts of friendly damage to your team because there's just too many friendlies in one spot. Make sure you stay spread out across the objective. Alright, onto our last topic, the weapons. As a beginner, finding the weapon that you like to play with is also very important in getting good. Once you learn the basic feel of the weapon, you can then progress on doing more advanced mechanics with it. Learning weapons and their animation is very important, as knowing what your enemy is fighting with will give you an advantage in a way that you can recognize which attack types your opponent is using. However, in this guide, we won't talk about the statistics of each weapon or any weapon for this matter, though I would advise you to try out the various weapons which Chivalry 2 has to offer. A great way to practice your weapon of choice is by going into community 1v1 duel servers again, as you will come up against different people with various playstyles. This will allow you to transfer the skills that you learned over there into larger matches. To summarize, pick a weapon of your choice and learn how to play with it to the point where you are comfortable with using it in at least 1v3 situations. Meaning, you will start to eventually learn the speed, the range and the damage of the weapon, which will give you an advantage. Alright boys, I've put a lot of effort into this video on the guide, so I hope you've enjoyed and learned something new. And I know this is a lot of information to take in at once. However, if you made it all the way here and if you feel like this guide has helped you in any way, I would appreciate if you left a like on the video and then subscribe, as it helps out the channel more than you think. I also have a Twitch channel, and if you would like to check it out, links are in the description. I play a lot of Chivalry 2 on there, among some other games, so come and say hello and maybe you can learn something new over there as well. But alright, that is all from me for today. Thank you for watching the video, and YFX out.